right, to all of our Team Justice friends, I am thrilled to have my friend Kim Wehle. I'm always pausing before I pronounce it. It's like the Daily Whaley, right?
Exactly. It took me a long time to figure out that's the shortcut to proper pronunciation. So, yes, daily, Whaley, Whaley daily, it rhymes.
So Kim Wehle, who I've known for several years now, she is a law professor at the University of Baltimore School of Law. You all probably know that she is a CBS News legal analyst, and I'm sure you've seen her on air. She's the author of multiple books, and the one that has just published in recent days, her latest is How to Think Like a Lawyer and Why. And I finished it about a week ago. And so I want to dig into it and have her explain why she wanted to write it, and then take the reader through a little bit about how people can use the skills that lawyers are supposed to have when it comes to problem solving and decision making and apply it to their everyday lives. So, and then we're going to touch on some of the other books that Kim has written in recent years. You know, she doesn't write how-to books, she writes why-to books. So the other one is what you need to know about voting and why, how to read the Constitution and why. And I love that you have, why-to books, not just how-to books. So let's start by talking a little bit about how to think like a lawyer and why. What is it that prompted you to want to write this? And then I want you to take the viewers through what you call the BYCAT method of problem solving.
Well, first, Glenn, let me thank you for having me on. I know this is usually a one Glenn show, and it's really a privilege to be an actual guest on this program. And I've also met a bunch of your viewers, and this is really tremendous to be able to talk to you all. And just as a little caveat, I have a 12-year-old having a piano lesson in the back, so if you hear a little sort of serenade, that's what that is. The reason I wrote all three books, I have to just start from the beginning, which is I am a professor and write sort of scholarly journals and things like that, art journal articles. But when Trump came into office, frankly, I remember sitting reading the New York Times, and there was a broad statement about the president's pardon power being unlimited, and there's no restrictions whatsoever. And that was when I said, wait a minute, this isn't correct. It's in the New York Times. And so I started writing op-eds, and then started doing, TV, radio, etc. And I was writing a very academic book for Cambridge, which I never finished. I still will finish it one day. Realized I was shifting the tone to a different audience. And that's the first book, where I realized there's a crisis in civic literacy in America. Only a third of Americans at that time polled could name the three branches of government, let alone tell you how it functions: executive, legislative, and judicial. And why, as I tell my students, if you understand the why, you can remember the what, right? If you really understand the nuts and bolts of why we have this stuff, you don't need to remember the specifics. So that it's how to ride the Constitution bike, not necessarily me telling you what to think. And then I got to the end of that. And you think after all this legal teaching, this would be obvious in the scholarship. I was like, wait a minute. Everything about the Constitution leads to one place, and that's voting. That's the ballot box. And so if the Constitution itself is just a piece of paper, it doesn't grow arms and legs and go to court and enforce itself. It doesn't have its own police force that just is there as the Constitution cops. How is it largely enforced? I mean, we have lawsuits and things and criminal indictments, but mainly it's at the ballot box by firing people that abuse it, right? Because it only really applies to government actors. Then we got through that. We're coming up on, 2020, and you and I have talked about this at length, and both personally and on air, etc. We had so much misinformation going into November 2020, the attack on the Postal Service, and all of these other attempts to stop an election in a pandemic. It was a miracle that the thousands of regular people came out to make it happen, to work the polls, to count the ballots. It's just amazing. And these people they didn't commit any fraud. They actually came out and did their public duty. And I'm grateful to them. And so all of this sort of distortion around fraud, it's like, come on, these are our friends, these are our neighbors, these are our colleagues. And so, but we're still in it, Glenn, as you know, we're still in the big lie. We're still in the misinformation. So then I said to myself, okay, I was teaching a class to law students. I know you're also a professor. And in the middle of when I was on CBS with the first impeachment, in the middle of that, talking about the Constitution, and I was like, whoa, this is so polarized. I asked them to read 2 op-eds for each class, offering different points of view on the same topic, but we also had a sort of a sorting mechanism so that they got good information. How do you find a reliable source? And at the end of this class, Glenn, they said, this is the first time we felt safe to talk about this stuff. And they got really curious about different points of view. And that's when I said, listen, I can take some of the skills that we as lawyers do automatically, where we look for questions, not answers. I mean, the stuff that's presented in court, as you are, brilliantly stood in front of juries and walked them through. Here is what I want you to conclude. But Glenn, the weeks and months of work doing the spade work before, that's behind the scenes. That's getting curious. That's looking at the facts. That's looking at the law, looking at how do you verify the facts? Because you can't just put anything in front of a jury. You can't put garbage in front of a jury. So that's the goal of this book, is to give people an alternative skill set, potentially, to solving problems, to having engaging in debates. That's not so much about, here's my role, my position, this is my belief, I'm going to take it to the ends of the earth, this is my team, don't tell me any alternative facts or different points of view, I'm going to do it, I'm going to stick with this, and say, well, no, actually there's another way. We can look at questions, and that's my 5-part test in the book, or method, I should say.
Tell the readers, give them a little preview of what the BYCAT method is. And I'm going to admit, I may alienate some viewers here, but I'm a dog person. So when I read your BYCAT, I'm like, BYCAT, I like cats too, but it was easy for me to remember. But kind of take them through that and how the BYCAT method can kind of help in everyday decisions you have to make. And I love in the book, you talk about family decisions. You talk about divorce, which many of us have been through. You talk about making healthcare decisions. You talk about, and I love it toward the end of the book, how to think like a lawyer when you're hiring a lawyer. And it's like, that's brilliant, because we're turning the tables against our own. So talk a little bit through the method and how you can see it assisting people in their everyday lives.
Absolutely. And I love the cat versus dog, because that's a great example of what we're trying to move away from with this book. That is, Glenn, I'm a dog person, so or I'm a cat person, you're on the wrong team, and let's just argue about which cats or dogs are better. The BYCAT method starts with, step 1 is B for breaking a problem down. So did Donald Trump commit a crime? Should I take the job across the country? Should I get my child vaccinated? That is an overwhelming, very complicated question that sounds easy, but it isn't. And as you know, lawyers will break it down. When you're proving a case to a jury, there's certain elements you have to prove. It's like ingredients in a recipe. So breaking down a big problem into smaller chunks is step 1. So do I get my kid vaccinated? You might have the question of, number 1 might be school. Can they go to school without it? Number 2 could be their medical situation. What are the healthcare implications for your child? 3 could just be your ideological beliefs, one way or the other. But when you break it down into those pieces, it's hard for one to immediately gobble up the rest, right? You're dealing with it step by step. That's B for BYCAT. And this surprises, I think, some people, I is identify your values and your aim. When I say values, I mean, I know justice matters. There's one, justice. And I think people think of lawyers as fight, 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 no matter what, be aggressive, be nitpicky, all this stuff. And actually, all of our laws have a value system behind it. We don't want arbitrary killing in the streets, so we have a ban on murder. We don't have to have that. But for yourself, if you identify early on what matters to you with respect to that decision, take divorce. It could matter to you to just move through it quickly. I know that I talk about in the book. That for me was my primary thing, but you have to give some stuff up. But if you know that, okay, that's what matters to me for my kids, you can guide your decision making better. C is collect lots of knowledge. We could get back to that, but lots of knowledge. Things bearing on all different elements. Let me stop you
there, because the collect lots of knowledge part, it seems like, is more challenging than ever. And you talk about the sort of disinformation tsunami that has washed over us. And I will say, you also made me nostalgic for things like encyclopedias and card catalogs. And when I say nostalgic, I mean nostalgic. I mean, I was the guy who enjoyed unfolding the roadmap and trying to see where I was going. I was the guy out in the woods in the Army shooting, using my compass to shoot azimuths to do land navigation. All of those skills are just kind of lost today. And that makes me really sad. So I didn't mean to interrupt you as you were going
No,
through
thank you.
BYCAT, but collecting that reliable information is more challenging than ever now.
Absolutely, for a number of reasons. One is that, as you indicated, that there was a skill in, we were taught in school. How do you use the card catalog? What do the numbers mean? How do you find the books? If you have to get original sources, you had to go to microfiche. You had to figure out how to put it in there. You had to then go to the copy machine and copy it. It was hard to get the information. Now it's hard to decide to sort it. It's just constant, overwhelming, completely different skill set. We are not being taught it. We don't know how to do it for ourselves. We are just assuming we're all going to be able to manage that on our own. Number two, we all had the library had the books for everybody. Now we have algorithms developed by Facebook or whatever that say, oh, you know what? I know what Glenn's biases are based on his clicks and his swipes, because there's no way he can not be tracked and live in society anymore. So I'm going to feed information to Glenn that I think he already believes. That's not a open-minded set of facts. That's a biased set of facts. And then the last piece that surprises many people is that the laws have changed. Back in the 1940s, when the Federal Communications Commission was created, Congress said, you know what, we want to make sure that if you're going to get a license to broadcast, that we have some rules. And one of the rules, it was called the Fairness Doctrine. You've got to put both sides out there. That was abolished in 1987. And now we've got Fox News and Newsmax and all these things.
Unfairness ever since for 35 years. Yeah.
It's been bias. It's been one-sidedness. It's been manipulative. It's cynical. It's deceptive. And this is not information. So we need to learn those skills. And I have them in the book. Look to see the source. Is it reliable? There are still reliable news outlets out there. And number two, click on the original sources. You don't have to go anymore to the card catalog. It just takes a little more spade work, Glenn. We spent the time in your nostalgic days driving down or riding our bikes to the library. I think these days it's hard to retrain our brains to spend the next few minutes it takes to verify what you're reading and make sure for yourself and your common sense that it makes sense. So that's C, that's collect knowledge. And I use knowledge specifically, not facts, because unfortunately, even that word has become political.
And then A, argue both sides of every point. How good are we at that these days?
Right. We're not even listening to it. Right. So I can't even remember now if you like cats or dogs. I'm a dog person as well. But I'm team red. I'm team blue. I'm team this. I'm team that. I don't want to hear it. I'm just going to dig in. It really surprises my students, Glenn, that they have to turn the coin over. And I remember being in law school, and I was at University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, and we had a writing course. We all have a writing course, and we had to write an argument in what we call a brief or a memo. And I was so convinced that my side that I was assigned was absolutely correct. I was just totally convinced. And then for the oral argument, they switched it, and they said, you have to take the other side. And by the time I finished the oral argument, I was so convinced the other side was right. And that's when it really clicked. And so that's a skill. We just don't do it. And any 5-4 decision on the Supreme Court, it means there are arguments on both sides. And then the last one, so that's A, analyze. And the last one, which actually you could start with, Glenn, is T, tolerate that you might have people that disagree with you and you might be conflicted. Right? That we don't get 100 cents on a dollar. It's not always a win-win-win-win-win. And if you want to get along with people and you want to be realistic about hard problems in your life, you have to understand that you're not going to carry the football across the goalpost every single time. And it can, if you are clear about what you want, what your values are, you can tolerate the fact that you didn't get all of it and you didn't win, right? A win can be a win internally based on your own sense of what's important to you. So that's the T part.
And you talk about sort of operating in the gray zone. And, I say, you don't just tolerate the gray zone, but embrace the gray zone, because so much, particularly in the practice of law and in our everyday lives, so much of it is gray. I really believed, Kim, if I, went to law school and studied real hard and learned everything and read every case and every footnote, 90% of the issues that I would confront and have to resolve would be black and white. And maybe 10% on the edge would be gray. And then I pretty quickly learned 90% is gray. And it's all
Absolutely.
about taking in the argument, appreciating both sides of every issue, and, navigating in that gray zone. So I think we have to embrace the gray if we're not going to drive ourselves crazy.
Well, and for lawyers, you won't get paid, right? I mean, you don't get paid in Washington $1,000 an hour for a private law firm or more because you can Google the answer, right? It's because it's gray. It's because it's hard. And so lawyers, just like investigators, criminal investigators, become like bloodhounds. And you also know, and we've talked about this. Look at the Kraken lawyers. The big lie in that. If you don't turn it over and understand the other side, if you're so one-sided, you're going to get sanctioned, and they were in Michigan. You could get disbarred. You could lose for sure. You could lose on appeal. It's a matter of just keeping your job, not, and because there are, as you and I both know, there are some unethical lawyers out there. And it's not to say people don't ever get away with skirting corners, but the system is based on the idea that the judge is going to think about what the other side's arguments, and they're going to ask you. The judge is going to ask you. So you
So
got to understand their side to be able to defend your position.
So let me turn a little bit to your discussion of precedent in the book, which I love how you break it down for lay people. You call it I think the Me Too and the not it, right? So precedent is hugely consequential to the practice of law, but it's also consequential to our everyday lives and the decisions we have to make, because we're going to look for precedent. How has something been decided or resolved before? We're going to see how closely our facts, our case, our decision parallel what was decided before. And we're going to use that precedent if it helps us, or we're going to try to explain it away if it hurts us. And now I want to kind of turn to the political. And how much do you think an absence of precedent sort of troubles lawyers when it comes to big ticket decisions like, well, let's see, we've never criminally indicted or prosecuted a former president of the United States who inarguably has committed any number of crimes. And because we have no precedent, how can we go about doing it for the first time? How can we take the maiden legal voyage? Should we take the maiden legal voyage? Can you talk a little bit about the importance of precedent and how it may actually hamper us from getting to justice?
Absolutely. So the big difference between, say, a statute, a law on the books, and a case decided by the court is if you have a law, thou shalt not kill or whatever, anti-murder statute, it applies to everybody and it's prospective in the future. It takes effect when you go forward for everybody. When you talk about precedent, a case, two people are fighting or two parties are fighting about something that happened in the past, and the judge's job is to call balls and strikes as between those two parties. But what precedent is okay, we have this fact pattern. The next case, are we kind of like that or are we not like that? And that's why I say lawyers will say, me too, I'm like that because I want the same outcome, or not it, I'm not like that. That's what lawyers do. Or if, say, you went on vacation, you had a great time at the beach in Mexico, and you want to try another beach, you might say, okay, this option is a lot like Mexico. We loved it. That's kind of the me too. Or it's really different. It doesn't have the all you can eat buffet. Not it. I don't want to go there. It's very similar, but it's not like every beach in Mexico is fantastic. So lawyers, let's face it, Glenn, a lot of lawyers are risk averse, right? I mean, one downside to legal education is that you're constantly vigilant for all the nuances and the pitfalls and the potholes. And so some lawyers will say, listen, there's no precedent there, or I need Congress to give me the green light and hand it to me on a platter, and so I'm not gonna go there. It's almost like an excuse, honestly. I mean, there's no precedent for Brown versus Board of Education finding that the fact of being in a separate school was constitutionally problematic because it was psychologically damaging for children, right? So pre- moving beyond precedent is how the law evolves, and the law evolves along with social norms. And I talk
Or
about book number two.
devolves. Precedent is a tricky thing because, yeah, once Dred Scott was precedent.
Scott.
Plessy versus Ferguson was precedent until it was killed by Brown versus Board of Education. But now look at where Texas is going. So, I mean, precedent, we generally think of that, arc of the moral universe bending toward justice, but all of a sudden it seems like it may be bending in other directions. And precedent is not necessarily going to win the day.
No, I mean, Justice Kavanaugh, I can't remember which, I might have done it for Politico. I did a piece after his oral argument in the Supreme Court's oral argument in the Dobbs case, right, which is the one about reversing abortion. And he made this argument that said, oh, we change precedent all the time and things evolve. And I think he even mentioned Plessy and he mentioned Brown and all this stuff. And the problem, Glenn, and the point that I made in the piece is, yeah, that's about expanding constitutional rights. That's about opening justice to people. This is the first time we've literally talked about crossing off a recognized constitutional right and essentially creating a system where government can force people to carry babies to term, forced pregnancies. That what we're talking about. So yeah, it's not it just like you said, Glenn, this is about gray area. Precedent is not black and white either. It's not either you have to have it or you don't have to have it. And I'm of the opinion, as you know, we are well beyond the stage where, oh well, presidents just can't be indicted. I mean, Donald Trump pushed through, talk about precedent, blew through so many precedents that were set by former presidents. He did so many, this has never happened before. I'm going to bulldoze through this norm. I'm going to bulldoze through this law. I'm going to bulldoze through this respect and this sense of integrity that we hope stands for America. That's the precedent. Now that's the new disrespecting precedent, and the law has to keep up with that. It has to. Otherwise, we've got a new set of rules by virtue of the new precedent he set, right? So I think prosecutors, as you know, we have to be very careful. You have to dot your I's and cross your T's, maybe be more careful with the former president. But the notion that, oh, this has never been done before, that's just an open season to just commit any crime you want in the White House.
And it probably qualifies as irony that people will say, we can't do something for the first time because we've never done it before and there's no precedent. That doesn't make any sense. That means we can never do anything. We never should have done anything for the first time. So, and I do think, you were kind about the way you characterized prosecutors. I think there's some timidity there. I think there is a fear of loss. I think there's a fear of embarrassment. I think there's a fear of criticism. As you know, I worked in the only U.S. Attorney's Office that prosecuted everything, both in federal court and in local court. So guess what? When the feds, us, didn't want to take a case, we kicked it over to the locals, us. So I lived that experience. So I've seen how federal prosecutors are determined to investigate exhaustively in the grand jury, trying to perfect their case. If they can perfect their case, you know what they do. They negotiate a pre-indictment plea, wrap it up in a nice little bow, and they never are on the court clock. There are no deadlines. There are no time constraints. And frankly, I don't want to be unkind or paint with too broad a brush, but if they find certain weaknesses in the case, well, guess what? They can kick it to the states and say, let's make this the state's problem. Or they can just say, we don't think there's enough evidence to proceed. And, that creates a certain culture and atmosphere in the practice of law. Like my friend Claire McCaskill says, who was a state prosecutor, we answer 911 calls as state prosecutors every day. We react, we charge, and we try cases. That's not the feds. The feds don't take 911 calls by and large. They are working proactively instead of reactively, and they take all the time they need. So not to poison the well, but can I ask you, like, what's your opinion? Because I'm always looking for other folks who have lived in this legal world to try to explain why we are where we are on the Donald Trump front and where we might end up. I understand the feds need a lot of time to thoroughly investigate the insurrection and the criminal undermining of the 2020 presidential election. And I think we give them all the time they need, but there are a lot of past crimes dating back to, certainly campaign finance violations when he was running for office in 2016 that have gone unaddressed. Where do you see all this, and how do you see it playing out?
That's a lot to unpack, and I'm interested in your thoughts on that as well. I think it's very disappointing that it looks like the Manhattan DA is caving, and I wonder, and that is, Alvin Bragg is two top prosecutors, well-respected people. The special grand jury is going to expire. Of course, you need the grand jury to indict, and the people that understand the case are gone, and the grand jury that's heard all the evidence is gone, is going to be gone soon. So I wonder, Alvin Bragg was elected, right? And Cy Vance, the predecessor, did not run. And I just wonder if the voters understood what was going to happen with that investigation if they put that man in office. So, unfortunately, accountability is going to come the next time he comes up for a second term. And, my sense is there are a lot of New Yorkers who are not happy with that. Who knows what went into that decision, but there's something called prosecutorial discretion. Prosecutors have absolute immunity from being sued for, with some very rare exceptions for these kinds of decisions. You can't prosecute every case. But I think that one's probably not moving forward. Of course, the Letitia James one is a civil action. And as I'm sure you've talked about with your viewers, civil actions are, you sue your neighbor for nuisance or for negligence. All you get is money damages. You're talking about money going back into the state of New York in unpaid taxes, potentially. Nobody goes to jail. We have what's happening in Georgia. I think that's a head scratcher because, that demand that Brad Raffensperger hand the election to him fraudulently was on an audio tape, and there were multiple witnesses to it that presumably could have been interviewed at this point to find out what Donald Trump's state of mind was at the point. Plus, we know, obviously, Glenn, we know what his state of mind was. We know because he made it clear back in the first impeachment when he refused to give the now international hero, President Zelensky of Ukraine, the money that Congress authorized or demanded that he turn over to stop Russians from invading him, right? And he said, no,
textbook
it's just
bribery and
unbelievable.
extortion of President Zelensky. And we haven't even talked about all of the counts.
So we know his mindset.
Yeah.
We know his mindset. I don't know about all of that. It does seem like it's small potatoes, but I do want to say something. I mean, relatively speaking, I do want to say something about January 6th. And that is, there is, as much as precedent needs to change, there's also, when it comes to presidents, there is kind of the political trajectory that people worry about. The office of the president, but also if you do this, what's going to happen to Joe Biden or whoever, any Democrat that's in office. We'll probably already see, if the Republicans take over the House, relentless, horrible investigations into silly things just to bully the Democrats. So we don't want to get in a system where we just politically prosecute presidents. That being said, and so we have to get the public's appetite ready for that. I keep going back to Jamie Raskin, whom I have a tremendous amount of respect for him. I have a show, Temple Politics, that I do from time to time on Instagram and on YouTube. I interviewed him right before the November election. He's this constitutional scholar and genius, and he said publicly, "Listen, we're going to have public hearings in April, and it's going to blow the lid off the House." That means, Glenn, you and I know this is not information that's in the public already, because he also did the second impeachment trial. We've heard those stories. And so I wonder if, okay, let's hear it. Let's get right before the election. Let's get the public kind of loosened up to this. I say take that information to the ballot box, because it's not just Donald Trump. It's the members of the Congress that were complicit in January 6th and that acquitted him for trying to extort President Zelensky, right? Those folks, with the exception of Mitt Romney, they all said we're okay with presidents who try to extort our Democratic allies from Russian aggression. And then I want to see, okay, let's see what happens in November. And then, oh my gosh, Glenn, I'm with you. Merrick Garland had better get off the, the dime and start doing some stuff that he was put in that position to do.
Yeah, and I was really pleased to hear Representative Raskin recently say, and I can pretty much quote him, I did a video about it. And mind you, he knows what the more than 500 witnesses who have been cooperating with the House Select Committee have been saying behind closed doors, as opposed to the really small handful of members of the cover-up club or the cover-up caucus, Bannon and Meadows and Jordan and Perry and Eastman and Clark, the rest of the treasonous clowns. Most of these people have been coming in for 4, 6, 8 hours at a pop, unloading what they know about January 6th. Against that backdrop, with that knowledge, Representative Raskin announced recently in an interview, Donald Trump is guilty as sin. He is a one-man crime wave, and he will get his comeuppance. That's not the word I would have used. I'm a Jersey guy, so I wouldn't have used such a fancy word. But that gave me a comfort level that's, even though he can't tell us what he knows,
Right.
He's sending signals. So yes, I think we all are anxiously awaiting the public hearings, and we hope that will force DOJ to move if they're not already moving. I also believe that they are doing all sorts of things behind the scenes, probably in unconventional investigative ways, because this is not a conventional series of crimes. So if it were me, Kim, I would exhaust every covert avenue. I would be up on more T3 wiretaps than we've ever been up on before I started serving subpoenas, grand jury subpoenas, on people that I knew would run their mouths or whose lawyers would run their mouths. And then everything would begin to seep out into the public square. I'm not counting out the Department of Justice, but I'm impatient, right?
Well, let me ask you that. I want to make a couple points, if it's okay. One is that, if you don't mind me asking you, if you could explain, if you haven't already, what the difference is between a traditional congressional investigation where you've got staff lawyers doing it for Congress, right? They are lawyers on the payroll of Congress that have spent their careers in the halls of Congress, versus this one that has career prosecutors that were, well known in the criminal justice system that are now working for Congress. That's number one, my one question. The second question I'm interested in you. Do you think there is some danger in a grand jury operating, talking to the same witnesses at the same time? They're essentially talking to the prosecutors. When I say, I mean, they think like prosecutors, like you, they work like prosecutors. They're not, the whole team is on board. The two Republicans that are on this, they're all want to get to the bottom of things. Do you think there's a downside for those prosecutors and for the DOJ if they're in tandem? Do you think maybe they said, listen, let us go first, and then you go? I'm interested in your thoughts on that.
Yeah, two great questions, but I thought I was the interviewer here, and now you're
I can't help.
and
my stuff I don't know.
Justice hears me all day, every day. I want them to hear from you, but great questions, and you're singing my tune, because you know who the general counsel for the House Select Committee is? It's a gentleman named Tim Heaphy.
I know Tim from many years ago.
Tim and I handled the same RICO cases. Tim and I started at the U.S. Attorney's Office 100 years ago together. I know Tim extremely well. He is strong. He is fearless. He will never take his eye off the justice ball. And I think part of what we're seeing and the way we see the House Select Committee choosing its witnesses and its evidence and what subpoenas to issue in what order is a product of Tim's remarkable tactical genius. I saw him give an opening statement in the largest RICO prosecution the city of DC ever brought, and I had chills. I mean, I am so comforted knowing Tim is heading up that effort. Now, to your second question, here's my concern, because what the question is, isn't there a risk when these witnesses are going under oath in congressional hearings, and if these same witnesses were going under oath before grand juries, they're now telling multiple stories, and human nature is such that if you're asked to tell a story twice, there will be inconsistencies. Or
they'll refuse to talk to Congress. They'll say, right, listen, we're going to do the grand jury. Grand jury is secret. The public never knows about it.
So here is where the unconventional piece comes in from my kind of looking at this from the outside. I was involved in criminal investigations in the grand jury where there were parallel investigations. Sometimes it's because the city was embroiled in a legal suit for what the police department did or what. And I always wanted to keep complete and exclusive control over the witnesses. I don't want to call them my witnesses, but I needed to make sure their testimony was locked in under oath before the grand jury and that it was pristine. And when I say pristine, I mean completely truthful and accurate. Good, the bad, the ugly, warts and all. We locked in bad testimony. If it was truthful testimony, it had to be truthful. What I didn't want to do was then willy-nilly turn that witness over to other organizations or agencies that were going to start taking sworn testimony from them, because I can no longer control what the testimony of my witness will look like when I have to go to trial. So this is being handled in an unconventional way. In some ways, one sworn appearance is better than two at this stage, and it's being developed by what I believe to be a really strong team in the House Select Committee. So maybe that's the unconventional investigative piece, you know, that leaves us uncomfortable because we're used to grand jury investigations and criminal indictments. Well, that's not the way this one is starting out. It doesn't mean it's not the way this one is going to finish up.
Right. It means, I mean, you respect Tim Heaphy. A lot of people respect, people in DOJ now respect Tim Heaphy. I'm sure Merrick Garland respects Tim Heaphy and his team. This is being done, you know, Cadillac or the Lexus version. This is being done by the best of the best of the best. It's not people in good lawyers, but they're really about dealing with legislation. They're dealing with politics. It's a different skill set. And it's being developed as if it were in DOJ. I just think that's a little different. And it's different that we don't have the political sniping. We've got all of the people on board in Congress. It's really kind of amazing how efficiently it's working. Chug, 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 chug. Because people aren't using this for political, personal gain politically by sniping at the other side.
And this conversation is lifting my spirits a little bit, making me feel a little bit better. So I want to touch on a couple of other things before we have to conclude. First of all, you talked about how, and I saw this in Wikipedia, which is, I guess, as close as we get to the Encyclopedia Britannica these days. I saw, and you mentioned it earlier, that you were kind of inspired to jump into the op-ed fray, at least, when you read that presidential pardons are absolute. I call those people the presidential pardon purists, and I rail against them constantly. But I wanted to know your view about how, the Constitution says the president has, the power to grant pardons and commutations. It seems to be absolute, but it can't be absolute for any number of reasons. What's your take on that?
Well, I'm going to lift your spirits again because I'm actually working on my fourth book that is about the president's pardon power, and it will be out before the next election. And that's because I completely agree with you. And it turns out that historically, the pardon power developed because there was no criminal justice system. There weren't laws in common law England around that we've talked about, murder, robbery, rape, these kinds of things. So the pardon power actually developed so that the king could start putting some rules in place to govern people's behavior because they were just so awful to themselves to each other with no limitations. And then as it developed, there were restrictions put on the pardon power. And then by the time the United States was the Constitution was ratified, the Parliament in England actually has a say in how pardons are actually issued. So it's really strange. If you look back, I mean, our conservatives on the court say they're originalists. We want to go look back to the original intent. I mean, the standard at the time was not what we have. We have a more unlimited pardon power than even we adopted from the king that we were rejecting through a Revolutionary War, okay? And so it's one of these things that it's the opposite of precedent. There's some stray language here and there in old cases by the Supreme Court saying it's absolute, but it's really there as a check on a failed criminal justice system, a criminal justice system where there aren't rules, where there isn't accountability, where it's arbitrarily putting people in jail, where it's killing people for stealing a loaf of bread, whatever, those kinds of things. And so I think there's an argument that is obsolete completely at this point. But I think when you break it down logically and look at the reason behind it, of course, it's not unlimited. It's not unlimited because if the president were to say, as you know, this is why I wrote the first op-ed, the president were to say, I'm only going to pardon white people, it would violate the Equal Protection Clause. Okay, that kind of a decision based exclusively on race is illegal, even for a president in that way. I would argue it doesn't mean it would win, but also at the end of the day, as our now nominee to the Supreme Court, Judge Brown Jackson famously said in that Don McGahn case in the DC Circuit, she wrote, and I'm paraphrasing, one thing is sure about it, the American government and Constitution, no more kings. No more kings. And an unlimited pardon power is about as close as you get to that. You don't need to be a constitutional scholar. You don't need to be a lawyer. Yeah, we fought a revolution because we didn't like King George. So it's got to be wrong. It's got to be wrong. But we're stuck on this precedent problem, Glenn.
Yeah, and even Bill Barr, of all people, said in testimony before Congress that a president cannot deliver a pardon to buy a co-conspirator's silence. So if Bill Barr, that's a bridge too far for Bill Barr, for goodness sake. And I maintain that the Roger Stone pardon, the actual delivering of that pardon, was part and parcel of the crime of obstructing justice. I mean, when you have Judge Amy Berman Jackson, who said at Roger Stone's sentencing hearing, you weren't prosecuted for standing up for the president, you were prosecuted for covering up for the president. And when you look at the history, how that unfolded, when Donald Trump told Roger Stone, stay strong, don't be a snitch, Roger Stone, after lying to Congress about things that could implicate Donald Trump, stayed strong, went to trial, got convicted, got sentenced to 40 months in prison. And 3 days before he was to report, he said in an interview, Mr. President, I stayed strong for you. I want my sentence commuted. And later that day, Donald Trump commuted his sentence. What I just described is the crime of obstructing justice at a minimum. I mean, I've made light before in arguing with some of these presidential pardon purists saying president can do anything he wants. There's no such thing as a corrupt pardon. I said, well, if he signed a pardon and balled it up and shoved it down somebody's throat and choked them to death, would that be a lawful use of the pardon power? That's obviously a joke, but like you say, it cannot be completely unconstrained.
No, and that kind of argument, as I talk about in the book, it's just bad argument. It's bad reasoning. It's bad logic, right? It's pardon power is unlimited because it's unlimited. Classic circular argument, classic question begging. It's like, come on, folks, let's tease this apart. Let's break it down. There are reasons. It's the and why of my books. There are reasons for laws. Why do we have a pardon power? Not so that it can be used sort of for political maneuvering and entrenching power. How is it used? It's either used for mercy, like I described, to sort of
pure injustice.
Justice, or it's been used for really broader political healing, right? So pardoning people that dodged the draft in the Vietnam War. It has historically for centuries been used to say, listen, I need to do something as president or sovereign, sorry for my dogs, do something as president or sovereign to tamp down the strife in the country. We need to move forward because this is bad for the country. But it's always about what's good for the people, not good for me. Yeah. But Glenn, what has to happen? Someone either has to be a creative, courageous lawyer to make the argument that it's obstruction. They have to have an attorney general that's willing to do that and maybe lose, as you said, which could be humiliating and career killing. Or we have to have U.S. Congress that will pass a bill making obstruction of justice in relation to a pardon of crime. Then we would have to see that litigated to the Supreme Court because someone would argue, maybe we have to have a prosecution under it, but you could have a challenge to the law itself. That gets kind of tricky. So, and then you would have to have a Supreme Court that that would listen to these arguments, not in these midnight decisions on, without full oral argument, and that we're seeing now, this kind of in the middle of the night docket that's happened, but a full analysis where scholars and experts come in and make the arguments you're making.
Yeah.
And if those two things don't happen, it's going to be a source of abuse. And we just have to put people in office that have integrity and care about justice.
Yeah, and there's no shame in bringing a righteous prosecution and losing it. There's nothing but shame in declining to bring a righteous prosecution for fear of losing it. And that's what I think often holds up particularly federal prosecutors. Let me finish with this, and it's not really fair because it's a bigger question than we have time for. So the new book obviously is How to Think Like a Lawyer and Why, but I want to go back to the previous book, What You Need to Know About Voting and Why. We've got the midterms coming up, and I know this is a big topic. We could do an hour on this alone. What is your top line takeaway that you think people ought to know as we prepare to head to the polls for the midterms?
Democracy is on the line. We're watching Ukraine, a democracy, be attacked with troops, bloodshed, guns, big ammunition. Moms are grabbing their children, hiding in bunkers, giving babies, giving birth in, underground, trying to escape. That's how they're trying to preserve their democracy. We're seeing regular people take up arms, learning how to use military grade weapons. They never thought they had to do it. That's what they're doing in this moment to save democracy. Our democracy is being attacked from the inside out through lies, through manipulation of the airways, manipulation, canceling votes. We're not talking about access to the ballot. That's getting tightened. But canceling votes, that's the big lie. The happy note, we don't have to take up arms right now. We need to vote. We need to vote. That is our ammunition. That's how you save your children. That's how you take them by the hand. That's how you preserve and protect their freedoms. What is that? What does freedom mean? Look at Russia, look at the Russians, and look at the Ukrainians. That's the difference between freedom and not freedom. It's as stark as can be. It's a gift, right, to see this so starkly. So the main takeaway, vote, vote, vote. Understand, just like these parents are having to go through hoops to protect their kids, you're going to have to go through some extra hoops to vote. Get right now. Apply for your mail-in ballot. Get all your friends to do it. Make sure it's perfect. And if it isn't, you show up on that day. You take the day off. You do whatever you need to do, and to vote. That is absolutely crucial. And I'll tell you one more thing. And I know you and I both get accused of being political this or political that, or bias this or bias that. I don't care if you vote for a Republican or a Democrat. How do you vote in November? You vote for anybody who rejects the big lie and embraces democracy and embraces the rule of law and government by we the people. The rest of it goes by the wayside. Whatever your issues are, climate change, LGBTQ rights, immigration, those are all important. But when you've gotten in a car accident and your carotid artery is severed and you're going to die in 15 minutes, but your legs are broken, this is what the doctors are going to deal with first. And we need to get those corrupt politicians out of office. They cannot no longer hold power. There's just, honestly, Glenn, we've talked about this many times. It keeps me up at night. But when I see the courage of the Ukrainian people, I know we have it too. And it's just going to be easier for us, but we've got to get that message out, Glenn. We got to get the message out.
Well, let me tell you, that is a great wrap up. You gave me democracy goosebumps, and just comparing what we have to do to save our democracy with what the folks in Ukraine are doing right now to try to save their democracy is perfect. It's perfect. So I appreciate that. I appreciate you spending almost an hour with us now. We're going to do this again before your next book is published because I so enjoy the conversation. And I appreciate that you are in this fight, as we all are, as Team Justice is, to try to save our democracy, to try to get us back on track. And I still believe that we can do it. We just have to, keep getting up every morning and fighting every day until we make the kind of progress that will shore up our democracy.
I agree, and thank you for having me, Glenn. I appreciate your friendship and support, and thanks for all of your viewers who made it through to the end of this important conversation. Look forward to the next one.
Thanks, Kim. Appreciate it.